Brave Battle Saga, The Legend of the Magic Warrior, is another extremely long title. Is this a thing now? Seriously, it's the second time in a row where I review a game with a long title. Where was I? This is a JRPG released for the Sega Genesis or Megadrive in Taiwan back in 1996, but it only received its first official English release in 2018. And yes, this is an official release, as Piko Interactive bought the rights to the game, translated it into English, and is now selling it in cartridge format. Actually, funny story, the game was also translated to Russian in the late 90s and early 2000s, and launched in that country under the title Final Fantasy. I'm guessing they only got away with this because the bootleg market was immense in Russia during that time. Though I have heard that the Russian translation was so poorly done that the story is nearly incomprehensible. Having originally started out as a Taiwan bootleg game, I wasn't quite sure what to expect from Brave Battle Saga. I mean, I liked Water Margin, but I didn't really enjoy Generals of the Yang family. Thankfully, I was pleasantly surprised by this one, and it turned out to be a pretty good, if flawed, JRPG that definitely deserved a worldwide release back in the day. Anyway, the game comes in a Sega Genesis style box, which is a really good reproduction of the classic Sega packaging and should fit right in with the rest of your Megadrive collection. Now, while I like the box, I can't really say I like the cover art. It's drawn in a very Western style of design, despite the game itself having a clear anime style. I'm guessing they were going for a fantasy style reference, where Sega tried to disguise the series' anime influence by using Western art. But I'm fairly certain the reference will be lost on a lot of gamers, on top of it looking just plain weird. Inside, we find the game, the manual, a map, and a POG? Why? I mean, don't get me wrong, it's always good to have extras, but why a POG? Is it because it's a 90s thing and this is a 90s game? That's quite a bit of a stretch there. The manual, like everything else so far, is also hit or miss. I like that it's in color, uses in-game sprites, and does a good job at introducing you to the game's mechanics. But then, it also has several pages dedicated to this weird comic book style tutorial. Not to mention, the tutorial itself takes up too many pages, and it just feels like a odd tonal shift when compared to the rest of the manual. Oh, and the manual also features an alternate cover for the game, which somehow manages to look even worse than the other one. Overall, I'd say the manual is still good. The good definitely outweighs the bad, but it really could have used a more focused tonal design. Next up, we have the map, which, although a bit simplistic, looks pretty good. The manual is clearly just for show, as the game itself is completely linear, meaning you won't ever need to use it, but it is nice to have. Finally, we have the cartridge, which is probably the best case Piko has produced so far. If you've seen some of my past Piko published reviews, like Water Margin, Generals of the Yang family, and Duke Nukem 3D, you might remember their cartridges were often flimsy or had bits of plastic sticking out. This one, on the other hand, has none of those issues, and save for a few minor differences here and there, makes for a good reproduction of an official Sega Genesis or Megadrive cartridge. So overall, this is a good packaging, but several odd decisions keep it from being a great one. Booting up the game, you're given a short introduction on how long ago human civilization once mastered magic and technology. But an apocalyptic war with demons resulted in both civilizations being nearly destroyed, and we were set back to the Middle Ages. So, you know, typical JRPG backstory. You play as Tim, and whoa, is it me, or does this game look a lot like Final Fantasy VI? Don't get me wrong, this isn't a criticism, and the graphics were clearly not lifted from the game. Every sprite and background is original, and I'm really digging the look of the game. Not bad for an unlicensed bootleg game from Taiwan in 1996. Anyway, you play as Tim, who, after undergoing a coming-of-age ritual in his village, is wrongly accused of murder and is banished from his hometown. From there on, it becomes your standard fare of finding new characters to join your party and grinding your way up to the top. And I gotta say, the battle graphics look really good. In fact, they look better than most officially licensed JRPGs for the Sega Genesis and Super Nintendo. Now, admittedly, the developers once again took inspiration from another JRPG, this time Breath of Fire 2. But just as before, the sprites weren't lifted, just strongly inspired by it. In fact, graphically speaking, Brave Battle Saga generally looks really good. The towns are lively and feature animated backgrounds, the battle screens look good, are nicely animated, and you often feel like you're casting some seriously powerful magic. You'll find the odd instance of parallax scrolling, and the colors are nicely balanced. Well, most of the time anyway. I know I keep harping back to this topic, but pirated and bootleg games rarely looked this good back in the day, and the ones that looked decent would usually rip their sprites, backgrounds and music from other games. Oh right, I haven't talked about the music yet. It's good. Again, bootleg games generally sounded not great, but regardless of whether you're fighting, walking around town, exploring a dungeon, or fighting a boss, the music is always well composed and fits the ambience nicely. The few issues I have with the soundtrack is that there isn't a lot of variety. For example, there's only one boss theme, so the music you hear when fighting the first boss is the same you'll hear when defeating the final boss. Anyway, the gameplay is your standard turn-based JRPG affair. But there are some interesting variations and the occasional flaw, which is probably a sign of the team's inexperience. For starters, battles are never randomly generated. Instead, you'll see the enemies patrolling back and forth, and once they see you, they'll rush towards you. Meaning, if you don't want to fight, you'll have to navigate your way around them. The problem is that I feel that a lot of the dungeons aren't really tailored for this, so you'll often have no choice but to fight. Not only that, but every time you return to the dungeon or overworld after a fight, the music will reset. By 1996, most JRPG developers had already learned to let the world and dungeon themes resume where they left off, but not here. Which means you'll be hearing the first 10 seconds of most songs a lot. Another odd thing is that the overworld sprites never correspond to the enemies you're actually going to fight. I feel that's a really missed opportunity, as it could have helped you prepare for the battle ahead. Also, while you'll occasionally find hidden chests and areas, there are no optional dungeons to explore. The most you'll get are optional bosses in story dungeons, which will let you summon them if you defeat them. As for the battle system, despite using Breath of Fire 2's visual style, the combat is closer to Final Fantasy in that you can use summons and need to pay attention to your enemy's element and use the correct elemental magic against them. The issue is that it's nowhere near as polished here. Yes, reading your opponent's element helps, but you can just spam other spells and it'll work just fine. But the worst part is simply how poorly balanced the game is. Every piece of armor you buy will only offer physical protection. It gets to the point where physical attacks barely cause you any damage, but magical attacks will nearly destroy you with a single hit. And this also applies to boss fights, meaning that bosses that rely on physical attacks barely put up a fight. But bosses that rely on magical attacks will be some of the toughest fights you'll have. Despite that, the game isn't particularly difficult, save for a boss fight or two, and you can easily finish the game with minimal grinding. In fact, the game will likely last you anywhere between 20 and 30 hours, and that's assuming you don't get lost in a dungeon or two like I did. The worst part is when a character tells you to get a certain item or speak to someone, but no one gives you any indication of where that item or someone actually is. Also, every character can learn magic, but there's a limit to how many spells each character can have. So my advice is to have half of your party dedicated to healing and buffing, and the other half dedicated to attack magic. You'll also learn summon magic, which can be pretty useful in the later portions of the game, and looks really badass. Lastly, we have the story, which is really basic. It's just your standard save the world formula, where you initially start out alone and eventually meet up with other characters who join you. The issue is that you don't get a full party until halfway through the game. By the time I had all 4 characters join my party, I was already at level 30. Despite that, their personalities are paper thin and easily interchangeable. Most of them have very little in the way of backstory or actual character, and what few plot points are brought up are usually forgotten, brushed aside, or resolved too quickly and neatly. In fact, the only character that has any semblance of a decent backstory and is given any sort of attention for it is Lucia, who replaces one of your old party members, joins you right near the end of the game, and her abandonment and family issues are resolved so quickly and neatly that it probably would have been better if they hadn't even included them to begin with. Then you have, Cherie? I'm gonna call her Cherie. She's the first character to join your party, and the game immediately hints that there might be something more to her, as the demons are always after her. I'm sure this could have made for a decent plot twist if it wasn't for one tiny problem. Her battle sprite is that of a flying demoness with horns, and no one ever acknowledges this. And then towards the end of the game, it's revealed she's a half-demoness, and everyone's completely surprised. A what? Cherie? A demoness? But how can that be? There was absolutely no hint or any indication of it. It also doesn't help that the translation seems a bit iffy at times. I know there isn't much of an established industry of translating games from Mandarin into English, but sometimes it felt like either I was missing information or that the translators had no context for the dialogue they were translating. Like for example, when you have to go take a written exam to become a priestess and the characters call it a testing area. I don't know, it just seems like an odd name for it. My favorite character in the game is probably when you meet a computer AI with Einstein's personality and you can contact him at any time with a press of a button, and he'll tell you where to go and what you need to do. A shame that halfway through the story, the game seems to forget about him, and his hints become increasingly outdated and unhelpful. Oh, and have I mentioned he has a brother named Edison, and that they constantly smack talk each other? Wait, Einstein? Edison? Are you telling me that this game takes place in a post-apocalyptic planet Earth, where magic and demons exist? Well shit, this game just got kind of awesome. Overall, Brave Battle Saga is a good game. It's not the best JRPG on the Sega Genesis or Megadrive by any stretch of the imagination. The combat isn't well balanced, there isn't enough music variety, the story is pretty standard, and the translation could have been better. But it's a good looking game, and what music you have is good. The combat is still fun, and I was interested in the game enough to see it all the way through. It's no Phantasy Star 4 or Shining Force 2, but it's a game that completely deserved to have been launched back in the day and likely would have been considered a 7 out of 10. You can buy the game from Piko Interactive store for $45, which, not gonna lie, it's a bit expensive. But I'd still recommend it. If you wanna get a cool JRPG for your Sega Genesis, you could do a lot worse than Brave Battle Saga. Hey everyone, thank you for watching St1ka's Retro Corner. If you enjoyed the video, be sure to like, comment, subscribe, and share this video. All that fun social media stuff. And be sure to hit that notification bell icon to know when a new video is out. Anyway, I hope you have a great day. Bye!